is a popular uprising in terms of communication. It comes from the bottom up. And you guys do this. I mean, I have my Facebook account, and there are all kinds of discussions that go on in there that are distributed, that are very participatory. Some of them deal with politics. A lot of them deal with other stuff that I usually log out. I don't particularly want to know about. But so it's a democratic revolution it must have been the same when movable type first came into being. And you no longer had to rely on some monks who took years to write illuminated documents, and that was all that anybody could read, and most people had no access to anything to read. And when the movable type came, I remember that very well. No, I actually don't, but I remember reading about it, I guess. I thought maybe I remembered it, but I'm not that old. And it was revolutionary. It made people crazy because now people were able to read and distribute information. It was hugely subversive. It was, kind of had the same effect that our new technologies had in Myanmar and Burma here last week when the government tried to crack down. And as the Chinese government discovered in Tiananmen Square when there was the crushing of the democracy movement there, that they hadn't thought about the millions of fax machines that were in all kinds of offices, colleges, factories, and everywhere, and where, even though they were controlling the news media, Chinese abroad were writing short little one-page summaries of what was going on Tiananmen Square and faxing them to every fax number in China. And the government had lost total control. And so in the same way, I think we are seeing a new revolution in terms of who communicates information to us and interprets things to us. And we have to learn how to sort out, what is essentially the untruth, what is essentially hyperbole, lies, distortions, and what is pretty interesting analysis that the conventional media isn't giving us. When you look at the numbers, and I know some of you are journalism majors, and I thank goodness you're getting involved in electronic journalism, because the numbers, the circulation for newspapers, for example, is going this direction. The ratings for the 4 networks is going in this direction, whereas the subscribers to all kinds of new forms of information are escalating dramatically in huge numbers. You get 8 million hits on a video on YouTube that has a political message. That's more than the circulation of all but a few newspapers in the country.
Thanks.
In the last election, we saw how Howard Dean's holler totally tore down his campaign. And now we're seeing things in the news about how Hillary Clinton laughs before she answers every question. With YouTube and the different things like that, do you think that that'll continue to hold weight against campaigns?
It's interesting because Howard Dean had already imploded, and well, I don't have it with me. I have it on a little digital tape recorder because I push it every once in a while on my radio show when things get particularly frustrating. It was actually kind of when you put an animal to sleep, it's already pretty much dead, and it's just the last injection. He had already collapsed in Iowa. There was no chance of him doing anything in New Hampshire, and it was sort of a metaphor. But in the case of Hillary Clinton, she's doing very well in the polls, and her laugh is no worse than a $400 haircut or somebody brushing their hair for exceedingly long time to the tune of I Feel Pretty, which I don't know, if I had my laptop with me, I could tell you how many hits, the Edwards little video clip of him combing his hair has taken. I think those things are equal opportunity attacks so that everybody running is going to have a YouTube commercial that they don't care for. Hillary Clinton most of you don't remember this, the Super Bowl commercial for Apple Computer, which only ran one Super Bowl, of, this giant screen with this threatening looking person talking and the zombies sitting in the crowd basically watching. And they took Hillary Clinton and put her in that commercial, and then had essentially sort of Barack Obama running in and throwing a hammer at it and blowing up Hillary Clinton. And then Clinton people did the same back to him. And so this is sort of like essentially out there on the peripheries of where the main military political campaign forces are operating. There is guerrilla warfare going on. There are snipers firing and people, casualties on the edge. But because there's so much of it against everybody, I think it's going to distribute itself. And I don't think it's going to have the effect. If Howard Dean had done the scream and then won the New Hampshire primary and then gone on to win South Carolina, swept Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and become president, we wouldn't even be playing that thing. The only reason we're playing it is because of essentially we like to be cruel to losers. And he lost, and he did this thing, and it's like, what were you thinking? But he was already pretty much finished.
Thank you.
With all this success that Congressman Ron Paul has had on the internet, I was wondering what you think his effect will be on the national election and his effect on the Republican Party in general from his policy stance.
Can you say Ross Perot? Ron Paul is not running for president. Ron Paul is running a revolution, and it's written backwards, right? He is triggering the most unbelievable excitement among a lot of people. Not nearly a majority, not Republicans, but all kinds of people who find him to be essentially a sort of termite drilling into the establishment. A kind of someone who doesn't play by the normal rules, who seems liberal and free-thinking on some things, even though he's pro-life, and who just has a certain message that seems to be compelling to some people. I don't think it's going to affect the Republican Party, to be honest with you. I mean, he is still a libertarian. And if only he had run this way when he was running as a libertarian. Of course, if you run in the United States on a third party, you're doomed because you're not going to get any media attention. Because in the United States, politics, and especially presidential politics, is viewed the way you view basketball or football. You can't have three teams. I mean, imagine what that would be like. Iowa State, Iowa, and UNI on the field, it doesn't work. And so the news media has no ability psychologically to want to bring third-party candidates into this in a serious way, unless they can yell and scream and buy their way into it, or they provide such a huge entertainment value like Ross Perot that you do it just for the ratings, because people watch the debates just to see, what kind of a chart Ross Perot has come up with this week. So Ron Paul is in the wrong party. Because the Republicans, I think, are divided in terms of where they want to go. They are not really libertarians. It's a mistake to think that the Republican Party wants to sort of deregulate and let people do their own thing. I mean, that was a message that people thought the Republican Party was promoting, but it turns out that they also want to replug in your life support system if you're, have been disconnected by a hospital because you're basically dead. They want to tap your telephone and survey your email and so on. And so the Republican Party has not exhibited a lot of desire to be essentially sort of leave people alone, let people do what they want to do. And I think Ron Paul represents that, which is why there's a lot of buzz about him.
You've mentioned a lot of new things for this political cycle. I was wondering what you think is going to be the effect of all the front-loading of the caucuses and the primaries on electing a candidate and then electing a president.
Front-loading, I wish we could run a primary or caucus season that's 3 months and then run the election after that 3 months and get it all over with. That would be my preferred front loading. We are essentially not doing anything good because everything is stretched out forever, and campaigns take forever now. So the front loading part to me is not what's wrong with the system. What's wrong with the system is the prolonged and really eternal campaign. Edwards has been in Iowa for 4 years running for president. 4 years. And that just, to me, exhausts people. In fact, we were talking about that earlier. This year, I have never seen people really exhausted by this time of year. Usually they're exhausted and ready to do a Hunter Thompson on their TV set during the end of the general election by October of the year of the election. You know what I mean? When you've seen all the nasty commercials of Republicans and Democrats attacking each other. Well, that's happening during the caucuses now, very early on. So the front loading to me isn't the big problem. The big problem is how long it takes to select a candidate, and then how it takes an entire year after that to actually have the election day. And that just can't be. I really, if I had the kind of power that we Latin Americans sometimes find so attractive, I would cut it down and say, you guys have 3 months to get a candidate, and then you have 3 months for the 2 candidates or 5 candidates. There'll be a socialist and a Socialist Workers' Party and a Libertarian, so on. Run for president and get it over with. Because we have, I think, traded in the function of elections, which is to quickly select leadership in order to have people run institutions. We have replaced that with essentially the virtue of the endless process itself. And the process has no real virtue unless it can produce results. It's like any other process. If it goes on and on and on, it's like meetings at universities. If you keep going on and you never actually make a decision, and you appoint another committee and it goes off and studies it, there isn't any particular prize that I would give to either corporations or any other institutions that can't quickly assemble the information necessary to make intelligent decisions and make them. And I think our election process doesn't provide that anymore. And I think people are cynical, people are tired of elections, and they want to get them over with. The president has risen. I mean physically. One more.
Well, I had a question because you talk about how important blogging is to the elections and how much it sways public opinion, but I feel like mostly it would affect people that were in constantly on the internet, which would be the younger people, but then we vote the least. And the people that are older vote the most, and they have the least internet access. So how does that...
Interesting. How many of you who are 50 or older have internet access and are on the internet all the time? And how many of you who are 50 or older don't have internet access and don't use the internet? There's your answer. It's just simply not true that of course, there are older folks who are uncomfortable with the internet and so on. But I send emails out constantly to my students, and there are a lot of them who don't seem to ever check their email because I never get anything back. You know what I'm saying? And it's true, yeah, I know, and you're clapping because you never send back the email when I send you one. And the internet and bloggers and blogging has so saturated society. There just are not very many people. And, even the digital divide, the poor people don't have computers. Well, if they have electricity and if they have a telephone connection, often now a lot of people, even lower income people, have access to computers. They might do it in a library or other places. We're now coming up, my friends at MIT at the Media Lab there are coming out with a computer that's $100 that you can charge up by cranking it. That computer is not going to be sold just in Africa or other poor countries. It's actually going to be sold in the United States to people who just don't want to spend, well, now, not much, because it's, you can get a Dell laptop for $300. but this one will be only $100. So even though there may have been a digital divide at one point, both by income and by age, it's over with. People really do have access to the internet. No, but you're right that the people who still read, how many of you who are 50 or over read the Des Moines Register? See? That's a lot more than in my class. So the people who are of a generation where paper was still important, where you read the newspaper, where you don't just read the news on the internet or do blogs and things like that, are doing both. And they're not necessarily relying. And the thing I would say is don't ever rely on just one source. I mean, read the Register and read the Ames Tribune and read the Daily and look at blogs and go to YouTube and see what outrageous things are going on there and watch CNN and listen to National Public Radio 640 on your dial or wi.org, streaming live on the internet Mondays at 11 o'clock, the Dr. Politics Show. Thank you.
Well, I said at the beginning that we were in for a treat, and we really were. Thank you, Stefan, so much for those insightful comments and the great humor that went along with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Get an original copy of this book, a tiny little paperback copy from when it was written in '72. And these books are in print. I bought these two in Minneapolis on Friday. So, how much do things change? Not very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hunter Thompson.
I once read a paper called Fear and Loathing.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would be happy to sign books. I think Chris here has some books of mine, various ones of different vintage. So if you want to, I'd be delighted to. Hello. How are you? Oh, I'm so glad you came. It's so nice to see you. White and I were talking about you and what? It's alive. But also people who are voting for Barack Obama are not going to vote Hillary. Hear Hillary. Oh, you haven't. Oh. But how many of us have seen all of these people too many times already? Is it? You really need to go see Hillary again? One more time? What is it you're looking for? Some sort of thrill? Or are you hoping to hear epiphany? Or you're hoping to hear her make one more very detailed position on, taxes and real estate investment law? No. Right.